Imagine you're sitting with a friend, and the conversation shifts to the topic of animal testing. It's one of those issues that seems simple on the surface but becomes more complicated the more you think about it. You might have heard a lot of people say that animal testing should be completely banned, and maybe, on an emotional level, you agree. After all, who wants to see animals suffer? But then as you start considering the full picture, things get tricky. What if banning animal testing actually slows down the development of new drugs and treatments that could save millions of lives? That's the real heart of the debate, balancing ethics with the practical need to advance medicine. First, let's talk about why animal testing exists in the first place. For centuries, scientists have relied on animals to test the safety and effectiveness of drugs, vaccines, and medical procedures. Some of the most significant medical breakthroughs in history wouldn't have been possible without it. Take the polio vaccine, for example. Back in the 1950s, polio was terrifying, paralyzing, and sometimes killing children all over the world. The vaccine that nearly eradicated the disease was first tested on animals. Without that research, it might have taken decades longer to develop, leaving countless more people at risk. Another powerful example is insulin. Today we know insulin is essential for managing diabetes, but it was only discovered after experiments on dogs in the 1920s. Imagine if we'd had to wait decades longer to discover it, or if it hadn't been discovered at all. People with diabetes would still be suffering and dying prematurely. Even treatments we take for granted, like chemotherapy for cancer, came from years of research that involved animal testing. So while we might want to ban animal testing immediately, the truth is that it's been an essential part of how we've made progress in medicine. But here's where the debate comes in. Is it ethical to continue using animals in this way? A lot of people say no, and it's hard to argue with that sentiment. After all, more than 100 million animals are used in experiments every year. Mice, rats, monkeys, rabbits, dogs, you name it. Some of these animals experience extreme pain, often without anesthesia. It's pretty gut-wrenching to think about, especially when you consider that these animals can't consent to what's happening to them. The ethical argument is that animals, just like humans, have the right to live free from suffering. In fact, public opinion on this issue has been shifting in recent years. A 2019 Pew Research Center survey found that over half of Americans are opposed to using animals in scientific research. This growing opposition has even led to changes in some laws. For example, the European Union banned animal testing for cosmetics in 2013, and other countries have followed their lead. But the reason we haven't seen a complete ban, especially in medical research, is that it's not as straightforward. If we stopped using animals in medical research today, we might slow down the discovery of new treatments for diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, to name a few. One example that highlights how animal testing affects medical progress is the development of COVID-19 vaccines. When the pandemic hit, scientists were racing against time to develop a vaccine, and part of that process involved testing the vaccines on animals first. They needed to know if the vaccines would work and if they would be safe for humans. Imagine if they'd skipped that step. How much longer would it have taken to get the vaccine? How many more lives would have been lost during that delay? Animal testing is a critical step in drug development, helping scientists determine a drug's potential side effects before moving on to human trials. This is especially important when it comes to life-threatening diseases. For example, cancer research heavily relies on animal testing to study how tumors grow and how treatments can stop them. If we halted animal testing, finding treatments for aggressive cancers could slow dramatically, and that would directly affect people's lives. That said, technology is starting to offer alternatives to animal testing. For example, scientists are working on organs on chips, which are tiny devices that mimic the function of human organs. This allows researchers to test drugs in a more human-like environment without using animals. There's also 3D bioprinting, where they can print human tissues and organs to use for testing. In vitro testing, which involves testing drugs on human cells in a lab, is another promising alternative. And then there are advanced computer models that can simulate how a drug will behave in the human body. While these technologies are exciting, they're not perfect yet. Organs on chips, for example, can replicate some functions of human organs, but they can't fully replace a living system. Testing a drug on a chip won't show how that drug might affect a whole organism with multiple organs working together. It's the same with in vitro testing. It's a valuable tool, but it can't completely replace the complexity of a living organism. And then there's the cost. Developing these technologies and making them widely available is expensive. We can't just flip a switch and start using them exclusively tomorrow. But the future is promising. As these alternatives improve, they might eventually reduce or even replace the need for animal testing in many areas. In fact, many scientists are already working to refine testing methods to make them more humane, reduce the number of animals used, and find ways to minimize the suffering of the animals that are still used. At the end of the day, the question of whether animal testing should be completely banned isn't as clear-cut as it seems. Yes, the ethical argument for banning it is strong. Nobody wants to see animals suffer, but on the other hand, we have to consider the consequences. Slowing down medical research could mean delaying treatments that could save millions of lives. Maybe the answer lies somewhere in between. We can continue to push for more humane methods and invest in developing alternatives, but until those alternatives are ready to fully take over, animal testing might still be necessary in some cases. In this debate, there's no easy answer. What we can do is stay informed, continue to challenge the status quo, and work towards a future where medical progress and animal welfare can coexist.